Year 1, Part 3. "Tilley Tuck, did you ever be hearing the like of that for a name?" said Judy, quite flabbergasted for once. "Never have I heard such a name on the island before." "He's been working on the South Shore for years, but he really belongs to Nova Scotia, Dad says," said Cuddles. Oh, that explains it. Many a queer name I've known coming out of Nova Scotia. And what will we be after calling him? If he's a young chap, we could be calling him by his given name, if he do be having one. But if he's a bit oldish, it'll have to be Mr. Tilley Tuck, since Hard Help is getting so uppish these days. And it'll be the death of me if I do have to be saying Mr. Tilley Tuck every time I open my mouth. Mr. Tilley Tuck. Judy savoured the absurdity of it. "He's quite old, Dad says. Over 50, remarked Cuddles. "And Dad says, too, that he's a bit peculiar." "Peculiar, is it, then? Oh, people do be saying that I'm a bit that way myself, so there'll be a pair of us. Is he peculiar in being worth his salt in the way of work? That do be the question." "He comes well recommended, and Dad's was almost in despair of getting anyone half suitable." "And is Mr. Tilley Tuck married, I'm asking? Mistress Tilley Tuck? Oh. "Dad didn't say, but he's to be here tomorrow, so we'll find out all about him. Judy, what have you got in that pot?" "A bit of soup left over from dinner. It did be thinking we'd like a little sup of it be bedtime. And lave a drop in the pot for Siddy. He's gone gallivanting, and it's a cold night, and maybe a long drive home." There was no trace of disdain in Judy's gallivanting. Judy thought gallivanting one of the lawful delights of youth. It was a wild, wet November evening, with an occasional vicious swish of rain on the windows, but the fire glowed brightly. Gentleman Tom was curled up on his own prescriptive chair, and McGinty slumbered on the rug. Boldenbad on one side of the stove, and Skudunk, a half-grown striped cat on his promotion, on the other, kept up a lovely chorus of purrs, and Cuddles had a cherry-red dress on that brought out the young sheen of her hair. Cuddles had such lovely hair, Pat thought proudly. Nothing so pallid and washed out as gold, like Dot Robinson's. No, a warm golden brown. Judy's soup had a very tempting aroma. Judy was past mistress of the art of soup-making. Long Alec always said all she had to do was wave her hand over the pot. Mother was mending by the table. Mother had never been strong since her operation, and Pat, who watched her with a jealous love, thought she ought to be resting. But Mother always liked to do the mending. "It will be the last thing I'll give up, Pat. Most women don't like mending. I always did. The little worn garments, when you were children, they seemed so much a part of you. And now your bits of silk things, it doesn't hurt me, really. I like to think I'm a little useful still." "Mother, don't you dare say anything like that again. You're the very heart and soul of Silverbush. You know you are. We couldn't do without you for a day." Mother smiled, that little, slow, sweet, mysterious smile of Mother's, the smile of a woman very wise and very loving. But then everything about Mother was wise and loving. When shrieks of laughter rang out, she looked as if she were laughing too, though Mother never did laugh. Not really. "Let's have a jolly evening," Cuddles had said. "If this Tilley Tuck creature doesn't like staying in the granary loft in the evenings, this may be the last evening we'll have the kitchen to ourselves. So let's make the most of it. Tell us some stories, Judy, and I'll roast some clove apples." "'Pile high the logs, the wind blows chill,'" quoted Pat. "At least put a few more sticks in the stove. That doesn't sound half as romantic as piling high the logs, does it?" I'm thinking it might be more comfortable if it isn't by way of being romantic, said Judy, sitting down to her knitting in a corner whence she could give up the soup pot and occasional magic stir. They did be piling the logs in Castle MacDermot many the time, and we'd have our faces frying and the backs of us freezing. Oh, oh, give me the modern ways every time. It seems funny to think of fires in heaven, ruminated Pat, curling up Turk fashion on the old hooked rug before the stove, with its pattern of 3 rather threadbare black cats. But I want a fire there once in a while, and a nice, howly, windy night like this to point the contrast. And now for your ghost story, Judy. I'm clean run out of ghosts, complained Judy, who had been saying the same thing for years, but she always produced or invented a new one, telling it with such verisimilitude of detail that even Pat and Cuddles were, sometimes, convinced. You could no longer believe in fairies, of course, but the world hadn't quite given up all faith in ghosts. Howsoever, when I come to think of it, I may never have told you of the night my own great-uncle saw the old MacDermot, the grandfather of the old MacDermot of me own time, a-sitting on his own grave and talking away to himself angry like, did I now? No, no, go on, said Cuddles eagerly. But the ghost story of the old MacDermot was fated never to be told, for at that moment there came a resounding treble knock upon the kitchen door. Before one of the paralyzed trio could stir, the door was opened, and Tilley Tuck walked into the room, and, though nobody just then realized it, into the life and heart of Silverbush. They knew he was Tilley Tuck, because he could be nobody else in the world. Tilley Tuck came in and shut the door behind him, but not before a lank, smooth-haired black dog had slipped in beside him. McGinty sat up and looked at him, and the strange dog sat down and looked at McGinty. But the Silverbush trio had no eyes just then for anybody but Tilley Tuck. They stared at him as if hypnotized. Tilley Tuck was short and almost as broad as he was long. His red face was almost square, made squarer, if possible, by a pair of old-fashioned mutton-chop whiskers of a faded ginger hue. His mouth was nothing but a wide slit, and his nose the merest round button of a nose. His hair could not be seen, for it was concealed under a mangy old fur cap. His body was encased in a faded overcoat, and a rather gorgeous tartan scarf was wrapped around his neck. In one hand he carried a huge, bulging old Gladstone bag, and in the other what was evidently a fiddle done up in a flannel case. Tilley Tuck stood and looked at the 3 women critters out of twinkling little black eyes almost buried in cushions of fat. "How pleased yez look to see me," he said. "Only sorter paralyzed, as it were. Well, I can't help being good-looking." He went into what seemed an internal convulsion of silent chuckles. Pat jerked herself out of her trance. Mother had gone upstairs. Somebody must say something. Judy, probably for the first time in her life, seemed incapable of speech or movement. Pat scrambled up from the rug and went forward. Mr. Tilley Tuck, is it?" "The same, at your service. Christian name, Josiah," said the newcomer, with a bow that might have been courtly if he had had any neck to speak of. It was not till afterwards that Pat thought what a nice voice he had. "Age 55, in politics, liberal, religion, fundamentalist, gentleman at large, symbolically speaking, and an Orangeman," he added, looking at a large picture of King William on a white horse crossing the Boyne that hung up on the wall. "Won't you take off your coat and sit down?" said Pat, rather stupidly. You see, we didn't expect you tonight. Father told us you would be here tomorrow.
I got a chance up on a truck to Silverbridge, so I thought I'd better take it, rumbled Mr. Tilley Tuck.
He hung his cap up on a nail, revealing a head thatched with thick pepper and salt curls. He took off his scarf and coat, and the cause of a mysterious bulge at one side was explained. A huge, stuffed, white Arctic owl, which he proudly set up on the clock shelf. He put his bag in one corner with his fiddle on top of it. Then, with unerring discrimination, he selected the most comfortable chair in the kitchen. Great-grandfather Nehemiah Gardner's old glossy wooden armchair, with its red cushions, sank into it and produced a stubby black pipe from his pocket.
"Any objections?" he rumbled. "I never smoke if ladies object."
"We don't," said Pat. "We're used to Uncle Tom smoking." Mr. Tilley Tuck deliberately loaded and lighted his pipe. 10 minutes before, no one in the room had ever seen him, and now he seemed to belong there, to have been always there. It was impossible to think of him as a stranger or a change. Even Judy, who, as a rule, didn't care what any man thought of her clothes, was thanking her stars that she had on her new drugget dress and a white apron. McGinty had sniffed once at him approvingly, and then gone to sleep again, ignoring the new dog entirely. The 2 grey cats went on purring. Only Gentleman Tom hadn't yet made up his mind and continued to stare at him suspiciously. Mr. Tilley Tuck's body was almost as square as his face, and was encased in a faded and rather ragged old grey sweater, revealing glimpses of a red flannel shirt which brought a sudden peculiar gleam into Judy's eyes. It was so exactly the shade she would be wanting for the red rosebuds in the rug she meant to hook coming on spring.
"If you've no objection to the pipe, have ye any to the dog?" went on Mr. Tilley Tuck. "If you haven't, maybe you wouldn't mind him lying down in that corner over there?"
Judy decided that it was time she asserted herself. After all, this was her kitchen, not Mr. Tilley Tuck's. Oh, and is it a well-behaved dog he is, Mr. Tilley Tuck? I'm asking ye."
"He is," replied Tilley Tuck solemnly, "but he's been an unfortunate kind of dog, born to ill luck as the sparks fly upward. You may not believe me, Miss
"Plum?" said Judy shortly.
Miss Plum. That dog has had a hard life of it. He's had mange and distemper once each, and worms continual. He got run over by a truck last summer, and poisoned by strychnine the summer before that."
"He must have as many lives as a cat," giggled Cuddles.
"He's in good health now," assured Mr. Tilley Tuck. "He's a bit lame from cutting his foot with a sliver of broken glass last week, but he'll soon be over it, and he throws a fit once in a while, epileptic, foams at the mouth, staggers, falls. In 10 minutes gets up and trots away as good as new. So you never need be worrying about him if you see him take one. He's really a broth of a dog, only kind and sensitive, and fine with the cows. I have a great respect for dogs. Always touch my cap when I meet one."
"What is his name?" asked Pat.
"I call him just Dog," responded Mr. Tilley Tuck,
and just Dog he remained during his entire sojourn at Silverbush. "A bit too glib with your tongue, Mr. Tilley Tuck," thought Judy, but she only said, "And what may your mind be in regard to cats?"
"Oh," said Mr. Tilley Tuck, who seemed quite contented with a whiff of his pipe between speeches, "I have a feeling for cats, Miss Plum. When I wandered in here the other morning, I thought I'd like the people here because there was a cat on the window-sill. It's a kind of instinct with me. So thinks I to myself, this place has got a flavor. I could do with a job here." And how right I was.
"Where might your last place be?"
"On a fox farm down South Shore way. No names mentioned. I've been there 3 years. Got on well. liked it well, till the old missus died and the boss married again. I couldn't pull with the new one at all. Everything came on the table bought, and only enough to keep the worms quiet at that. A terrible, tetchy old woman. You couldn't mention the weather to her, but she'd quarrel with you over it. Seemed to take it as a personal insult if you didn't like the day. Then she picked on dog right along. Even a dog has some rights, woman, I told her. You and me ain't going to click, I told her. I'm rather finicky as to the company I keep, I told her. My dog is better company than a contentious woman, I told her. I'm nobody's slave, I told her. And give notice. When I can't stay in a place without quarreling with the folks, I just mosey along. Likely, I'll be here quite a while. Looks like a snug harbor to me. This armchair just fits my kinks. I've had my ups and downs, escaped from the Titanic, for one thing.
Oh! Cuddles and Pat were all eyes and ears. This was exciting. Judy give her soup a vicious swirl. Was she to have a rival in the storytelling art?
Yes, I escaped, said Mr. Tilley Tuck, by not sailing in her. He put his pipe back into his mouth and emitted a rumble which they were to learn he called laughter. Oh, so that do be your idea of a joke, thought Judy. I'm getting your measure, Mr. Tilley Tuck. Not but what I've had my tragedies, resumed Mr. Tilley Tuck. He rolled up his sweater sleeve and showed a long white scar on his sinewy arm. A leopard gave me that when I was tamer in a circus in the States in my young days. Ah, that was the exciting life. I have a peculiar power over animals. No animal, said Mr. Tilley Tuck impressively, can look me in the eye. Oh, and are you married? Persisted Judy remorselessly. Not by a jugful, exclaimed Mr. Tilley Tuck, so explosively that everyone jumped, even Gentleman Tom. Then he subsided into mildness again. No, I've neither wife nor progeny, Miss Plum. I've often tried to get married, but something always prevented. Sometimes everyone was willing but the girl herself. Sometimes nobody was willing. Sometimes I couldn't get the question out. If it hadn't been such a temperance man, I might have been married many a time. Needed something to loosen my tongue. Mr. Tilley Tuck winked at Pat, and Pat had a horrible urge to wink back at him. Really, some people did have a queer effect on you. I've always thought nobody understood me quite as well as I understood myself, resumed Mr. Tilley Tuck. It isn't likely I'll ever marry now, but while there's life there's hope. This time it was at Judy he winked, and Judy felt that she was not half as mad as she should be. She gave her soup a final stir and stood up briskly. Would ye be joining us in a sup of a soup, Mr. Tilley Tuck? Ah, some small refreshment will not be amiss, responded Mr. Tilley Tuck in a gratified tone. I am not above the pleasures of the palate in moderation, and ever since I entered this dwelling, I've been saying to myself whenever you stirred that pot, of all the smells that I ever did smell, I never smelled a smell that smelled half as good as that smell smells. Pat and Cuddles proceeded to set the table. Mr. Tilley Tuck watched them with approbation. A pair of high-steppers, he remarked presently, in a hoarse aside to Judy. Some class to them. The little one has the wrist of an aristocat. Oh, and so you've noticed that now, said Judy, highly gratified. Naturally, I'm an expert in regard to weemen. There's elegance for you, I said to myself the moment I opened the door. Some difference from the girls at the Fox Farm. Just between friends, Miss Plum. They looked like dried apples on a string. One of them was as thin as a weasel, and living on lettuce to get thinner. But these two now, Cupid will be busy, I reckon. No doubt you've a terrible time with the boys hanging round, Miss Plum. Oh, we're not altogether overlooked, said Judy complacently. And now, Mr. Tilley Tuck, will you be sitting in? Mr. Tilley Tuck slid into a chair. I wonder if you'd mind leaving out the Mister, he said. I'm not used to it, and it makes me feel like a pilgrim and sojourner. Josiah, now, if you wouldn't mind. Oh, but I would, said Judy decidedly. Sure, and Josiah has always been a name I couldn't bear ever since old Josiah Milner down at South Glen murdered his wife. I was well acquainted with Josiah Milner, remarked Mr. Tilley Tuck, taking up his spoon. First he choked his wife, then he hanged her, then he dropped her in the river with a stone tied to her, taking no chances. Ah, I knew him well. In fact, I may say he was a peculiar friend of mine at one time, but after that happened, of course, I had to drop him.
Did they hang him? Demanded Cuddles with ghoulish interest.
No, they couldn't prove it, although everybody knew he did it. They kind of sympathized with him. There's an odd woman that has to be murdered. He died a natural death, but his ghost walked. I met it once upon a time.
Oh! Cuddles didn't notice Judy's evident disapproval of this poaching on her preserves. Really, Mr. Tilley Tuck?
No mistake, Miss Gardner. Most ghosts is nothing but rats, but this was a genuine phantom.
Did he speak to you? Mr. Tilley Tuck nodded.
I see you're out for a walk like myself, says he, but I made no reply. I have discovered it is better not to monkey with spooks, miss. Interesting things, but dangerous. So irresponsible, speaking romantically. So, as friend Josiah was right in the road and I couldn't get past him, I just walked through him. Never saw him again. Miss Plum, this is soup.
Judy had spent the evening swinging from approval to disapproval of Mr. Tilley Tuck, which continued to be the case during his whole sojourn at Silverbush. His appreciation of her soup got him another bowlful. Pat was wishing father would come home from Swallowfield. Perhaps Mr. Tilley Tuck didn't know he had to sleep in the granary, but Mr. Tilley Tuck said, as he got up from the table,
Understand my quarters is in the granary, so if you'll be kind enough to tell me where it is.
Miss Rachel will be taking the flashlight and showing you the way, said Judy. There do be plenty of good blankets on the bed, but I'm afraid you'll find it cold. There do be no fire since we didn't be knowing you were coming.
I'll kindle one in a jiffy.
Oh, then you'll be smoked out. That fire has to be lit for an hour afore it'll give over smoking. There do be something out of kilter with the chimney. Long Mr. Gardner is manning to have it fixed.
I'll fix it myself. I worked with a mason for years. Down at the Fox farm they had a bad chimney, and I built it over in fine shape.
Did it draw? Asked Julie skeptically.
Draw, Miss Plum. That chimney drew the cat clean up it one night. The poor animal was never seen again.
Judy subsided. Mr. Tilley Tuck possessed himself of his bag and his violin and his owl and his dog.
I'm ready, Miss Gardner, and as for the matter of names, Miss Plum, the Prince of Wales called me Josiah the whole summer I worked on his ranch in Alberta. A very democratic young man, but if you can't bring yourself to it, plain Tilley Tuck will do for me. And if you've warts or anything like that on your hands, Cuddles guiltily put a hand behind her, I could cure them in a jiffy.
Judy primed her mouth and took a high tone. Thank ye kindly, but we do be knowing a few things at Silverbush. Me grandmother did be teaching me a charm for warts when I was a girleen, and it works rail well. Good night, Mr. Tilley Tuck. I'm hoping you'll be warm and sleep well.
I'll be in the arms of old Murphy in short order,
assured Mr. Tilley Tuck. They heard Cuddles' laughter floating back through the rain all the way to the granary. Evidently, Mr. Tilley Tuck was amusing her. Certainly he is peculiar, said Pat, but peculiar people give color to life, don't they, Judy? Cuddles ran in, her face sparkling and radiant from wind and rain. Isn't he a darling? He told me he belonged to one of the best families in Nova Scotia. Of which statement I have me doubts, said Judy. I'm thinking he was spaking symbolically, as he says himself, and it didn't use to be manners taking your story right out of your mouth, as you heard him do to myself. But he seems a good-natured, simple sort of creature, and likely we can put up with him as long as our family animals can. He thinks you're wonderful, Judy, and he wishes you would call him Josiah. That I'll not thin, but I'm not saying I wouldn't be lavin' off the mister after a day or two. It's too much of a strain. Cuddles, dear, tomorrow I'll be fixin' up a bit of a charm for that little wart of yours. I'm knowing it should have been attended to a long time ago, but with all these comin's and goin's and hirin's and went out of my head. Oh, I'll not be having any Mr. Tilley Tuck with a side whisker casting up the family warts to me. I must write Hilary all about him, laughed Pat. He would delight in him. Oh, Judy, if Hilary could only drop in some of these November evenings as he used to do, that would be perfect. It's over 2 years now since he went away, and it seems like 100. Is there any soup left for Sid, Judy? Loads and lashings of it. Was it to the dance at the South Glen he was going? Wherever he went, he took Madge Robinson, said Cuddles. He's giving her quite a rush now. All summer it was Sarah Russell. I believe Sid is a dreadful flirt. Pat smiled contentedly. There was safety in numbers. After all, Sid had never seemed really to have a serious notion of any girl since Bets had died. It pleased Pat to think he would be faithful to her sweet memory all his life, as she, Pat, would be. She would never have another intimate girl-friend. She liked to think of herself as a happy old maid, and Sid as a happy old bachelor, living gaily together all their lives, loving and caring for Silverbush, with Winnie and Cuddles and Joe coming home for long visits with their families, and McGinty and the cats living forever, and Judy telling stories in the kitchen. One couldn't think of Silverbush without Judy. She had always been there, and of course she always would be. Judy, said Cuddles solemnly, turning back in the hall doorway on her way to bed. Judy, mind you don't go and fall in love with Josiah. I saw him winking at you. Judy's only reply was a snort.